Today we're going to be reading Sutra 42. Tatra Sabdartha Jñāna vikalpaiḥ saṅkīrṇā savitarka. Tatra Śabdartha Jñāna vikalpaiḥ. I'm not sure about that one. Vikalpaiḥ saṅkīrṇā savitarka. There, in it, with word, real meaning, true knowledge of the object which the yogi wants. Ordinary knowledge, based on sense perceptions and reasoning, and alternation between different alternatives owing to doubt or uncertainty, mixed up, confused, unresolved, involved, a state of samadhi characterized by vitarka. See Sutras 17, section 117 and section 219. We'll have to look at those. Savitarka Samadhi is that in which knowledge based only on words, real knowledge, and ordinary knowledge based on sense perception or reasoning are present in a mixed state, and the mind alternates between them. In dealing with the first three sutras of section 3, the three purely mental processes of dharana, dhyana, and samadhi have been explained in detail. In section 1, Sutra 41, which we did in the last video, the essential nature of samadhi has been discussed. But it is necessary to note that the word samadhi is not used for any specific or definite state of the mind. It stands for a very wide range of superconscious states of mind which lead to and end in Kaivalya. The state of samadhi must be attained before entry into the higher realms of consciousness is possible. It ushers the yogi into those realms, but the investigation of those realms and the mastery of the forces and powers which work on those realms has still to be accomplished by the yogi. It will be seen, therefore, that the mental state defined in section 3, Sutra 3, is merely a preliminary condition which qualifies the yogi to enter upon this task of investigation and control, just as a master's degree of a university qualifies a student to enter upon a course of independent scientific research. In the 10 sutras, beginning with this one, 42, some further light is thrown upon the technique of samadhi, which has to do with the investigation and mastery of these realms on the one hand, and the realization of reality which lies beyond those realms on the other. Samadhi with the former objective is called sabija samadhi, and that with the latter objective, nirbija samadhi. When the yogi has mastered the technique of samadhi as given in section 1, Sutra 3, and can perform samyama on anything which can become an object of samyama, and of which the inner reality has to be discovered, the question arises: how does he make further progress? How does he utilize the power which he has so far acquired for the investigation and mastery of the higher realms of existence, which he can now contact through his subtler vehicles? The technique of these further stages of progress is hinted at in section 1, Sutras 42 through 51, which is, we're just starting that now. It is not given in detail because no one who has not gone through the yogic discipline and reached the advanced stage where he can perform samyama can really understand these things even theoretically. The sutras mentioned above should therefore be understood not to embody the technique of the higher stages of samadhi, but merely as pointing to these stages in which exist and their relative position in the line of progress. Stages which exist and their relative position in the line of progress. They are suggestive, not explanatory. They are like the sketch map of a country which a traveler may intend to explore. Such a sketch map merely gives the relative position of the different parts of the country and the direction in which the traveler should proceed in order to reach his goal. But something more is needed for exploring a country than a mere sketch map. Before we proceed to consider the above-mentioned sutras, let us first try to understand the distinction between sabija and nirbija samadhis. In connection with Section 1, Sutra 17 on samprajñāta samadhi, it was pointed out that this kind of samadhi has 4 stages. These stages represent, as has been explained already, the 4 distinct and distinguishable levels at which consciousness functions through the 4 subtler vehicles and corresponding to the 4 stages of gunas mentioned in Section 2, Sutra 9. So it's referring to a lot of sutras. So I'm probably not going to be jumping around to those, but we'll see. It is also pointed out in connection with Section 3, Sutra 5, that the higher consciousness functioning at those levels in a state of samadhi is quite different from the ordinary mental consciousness with which we are familiar and is called prajna. I love that word, prajna. It's so beautiful. That is why samadhi of this class is called samprajñāta. All these 4 stages of samprajñāta samadhi are comprised in sabija samadhi, as pointed out in Sutra 46 in this very section, Section 1. Why is samadhi pertaining to these 4 stages called sabija samadhi? The clue to this question lies in the meaning of the word bija, or seed. What is the essential form of a seed? It is a conglomeration of different kinds of matter arranged in different layers. The outermost layer, forming the protective and least essential part. Okay. Let's see where he's going with this, because I think that the outer protective layer is pretty essential, right? It is a conglomeration of different kinds of matter arranged in different layers. The outermost layer forming the protective and least essential part, and the innermost layer or core forming the real or essential part of the whole set. So that, in order to get at the essential part or real substance of the seed, we have to tear open the different layers one after another until we reach the core. The general constitution of a seed described above will show at once the appropriateness of calling any samadhi of the samprajñāta type sabija samadhi. Samyama in samprajñāta samadhi is always performed on some object, which is called a seed, because it has different layers of meaning, etc., covering an essential core, which is the reality of the object. We can come into touch with the different layers of the object or seed by splitting it open, as it were, mentally through the technique of samadhi. Each successive stage of samadhi reveals to our consciousness a different and deeper layer of the reality of the object, and by continuing the process of samyama through the successive stages, we ultimately arrive at the innermost reality of the object. Each stage of samadhi lays bare only one layer of the total reality hidden within the object, and the progress of penetration may have to be pushed in some cases through all the 4 stages before the ultimate reality hidden within the object is revealed. But though there are 4 stages in sabija samadhi, and it may be necessary to pass through all these 4 stages before the object on which samyama is performed is revealed in its totality, this does not mean that every object on which samyama can be performed is sufficiently complex to require going through all the 4 stages. Different objects differ in their complexity or subtlety, some being more complex and having more subtle counterparts than others, as explained in dealing with Section 3, Sutra 6. Patanjali has not discussed systematically and in detail the different types of seeds on which samyama can be performed and the method of splitting them open in samadhi, but a study of the sutras given in the latter portion of Section 3 will give the student a fairly good idea of the large variety of objects which are taken up for samyama in yogic practice. A careful study of these sutras will not only give the student some idea with regard to the different purposes of sabija and nirbija samadhi, but also throw some light on the technique of samadhi. It will help him to get a clearer insight into the meaning of the 2 rather enigmatic sutras, 42 and 43, in which alone Patanjali has given some definite information with regard to the mental processes involved in Samadhi. Before we proceed to discuss these two sutras, let us first consider a few conclusions which may be drawn from a general study of the objects, Vishaya, upon which Before we proceed to discuss these two sutras, let us first consider a few conclusions which may be drawn from a general study of the objects, Vishaya, upon which samyama is performed, and the results which accrue from this practice. These conclusions may be stated very briefly as follows. 1. If two things are related as cause and effect, then by performing samyama on the effect, it is possible to have knowledge of the underlying cause or vice versa, as for example, in section 3, Sutra 16. 2. If certain phenomena leave an impression on any medium, it is possible to come into touch with the phenomenon by reviving the impressions through samyama, as for example, in section 3, Sutra 18. 3. If a particular principle in nature finds expression in a particular phenomenon, then by performing samyama on the phenomenon, it is possible to know directly the underlying principle, as for example, in section 3, Sutra 28, and section 3, Sutra 29. 4. If a particular object is the expression of an archetype, then by performing samyama on the object, it is possible to have direct knowledge of the archetype, as for example, in section 3, Sutra 30. All right, so I think I'm going about this the wrong way. Let me finish, because there's two more, but I'm going to insert, I'll do this. Number 5, if a particular center in the body is an organ of a higher vehicle, faculty, etc., then by performing samyama on the center, direct contact is established with the vehicle, faculty, etc., as for example, in section 3, Sutra 33, or section 3, Sutra 35. Number 6. If a thing exists in several degrees of subtlety, one derived from the other in a series, then by performing samyama on the outermost or least subtle form, it is possible to gain knowledge of all the forms step by step, as for example, in section 3, Sutra 45. So this is how you gain knowledge of all the more inner workings of the universe, is by performing samyama on them. Okay. A careful consideration of the facts mentioned above will show that samyama is really a means of passing from the outer expression to the reality within, whatever may be the nature of the relationship between the outer expression and the inner reality. Since the reality underlying all objects is contained in the divine mind, and the object of samyama in sabija samadhi is to know this reality, it follows that what the yogi does in samyama is to sink into his own consciousness until he reaches the level of divine mind in which the reality of the object is to be found. The seed on which samyama is performed merely determines the line along which consciousness has to sink. This may be illustrated by the following diagram. Or maybe it's over here, I'm not sure. Whichever background it stands out against best. Okay, isn't that interesting? Now let's talk about this diagram. A, B, C are different objects which can serve as seeds of sabija samadhi. A apostrophe, B apostrophe, and C apostrophe are respectively the realities of these objects which can be found in the divine mind through samyama. O is the center of divine consciousness. It will be seen that in every case, the essential process is the same, namely, proceeding from the periphery along a radius to the center until the intervening circle is reached. But different objects, which are represented by different points on the outer circle, make it necessary to proceed along different radii to the center. In proceeding in this manner, consciousness automatically touches the reality of the particular object when it reaches the level of the divine mind. So the seed merely determines the direction along which consciousness has to sink in order to reach the corresponding reality in the divine mind. It does not make any difference as far as the essential process of samyama is concerned, but merely guides the consciousness to the reality, which is the object of the search. In nirbija samadhi, the aim of the yogi is the center of divine consciousness represented by O in the diagram. In reaching the point O, he must proceed along a radius and must cross the intervening states of consciousness. That is why nirbija samadhi can come only after sabija samadhi, when all the stages of samprajñāta samadhi have been crossed. Having cleared the ground to a certain extent, let us now proceed to consider Sutra 42, which is what we're reading right now, which throws some light on the technique of splitting open the seed of sabija samadhi. Let me read it again, just so we know what we're talking about here, because it's been a while. Sutra 42 is, Savitarka samadhi is that in which knowledge based only on words, real knowledge, and ordinary knowledge based on sense perception or reasoning are present in a mixed state, and the mind alternates between them. Okay? This sutra deals with the mental processes involved in the very first stage of samadhi and may best be understood in relation to a concrete object having a name and a form. We are so used to taking all things which come within the range of our experience for granted that we never pay any attention to the mysteries which are obviously hidden within the simplest of objects. Every physical object which we can perceive through our sense organs is really a conglomerate of several kinds of mental impressions which can be sorted out to a certain extent by a process of mental analysis on the basis of our knowledge of sensuous perception and other facts discovered by science. Let us take, for the sake of illustration, a simple concrete object like a rose. Our knowledge regarding a rose is a mixture in which facts like those given below enter. 1. It has a name, which has been chosen arbitrarily and has no natural relationship with the object. 2. It has a form, color, odor, etc., which we can perceive through our sense organs. These will vary from rose to rose, but there is an irreducible minimum of qualities which are common to all roses and which make a rose a rose. 3. It is a particular combination of certain atoms and molecules or electrons at a deeper level, distributed in a certain manner in space. The mental image which is formed in our mind on the basis of this scientific knowledge is quite different from the mental image derived from the sense organs. 4. It is a particular specimen of an archetype, all roses which come into being conforming to this archetypal rose. A consideration of some of the facts given above will show to the student how mixed up our ideas are regarding even common objects with which we come in contact every day. Our true knowledge with regard to the real object is mixed up or confused with all kinds of mental images, and it is not possible for us to separate the pure knowledge from these mental images by ordinary processes of mental analysis or reasoning. The only way in which this can be done is by performing samyama on the object and fusing the mind with it, as explained in Sutra 41. The pure, real, internal knowledge regarding the object is isolated from the mixed external knowledge, and the yogi can then know the real object by making the mind one with it. It is obvious that there must be two stages in this process of knowing by fusing. In the first stage, the heterogeneous knowledge regarding the object must be separated into its different constituents. In this stage, all the constituents of the knowledge, internal and external, are present, but from an undifferentiated and confused state. They are resolved more and more into a state of clearly defined and differentiated constituents. In the second stage, the mind is fused with the pure knowledge which has been isolated in the first stage. In this process of selective fusion, naturally, all the other constituents which depend upon memory drop out automatically, and the mind shines only with the pure knowledge of the object, nothing else. In Sutra 42 deals with the first stage, and Sutra 43 with the second stage. Let us now consider the significance of the words used in Sutra 42 to indicate this resolution and differentiation of this composite knowledge with regard to the object into its clearly defined constituents. The word tatra refers to the state of samadhi described in the previous sutra and is obviously used to point out that this process of resolution is carried out in a state of samadhi and cannot be accomplished by an ordinary process of mental analysis. It is only when the mind has been completely isolated from external influences and has reached the concentrated state of Jñāna that it can successfully tackle this problem of resolution. Śabda, Artha, Jñāna define the three categories of knowledge, which are inextricably mixed up in the mind of the ordinary man and can be resolved only in Savitarka Samadhi. Śabda refers to knowledge which is based only on words and is not connected in any way with the object which is being considered. Much of our thinking is of this superficial nature, based merely on words and not touching the object at all. Artha refers to the true knowledge about the object or its real meaning, which the yogi wants. And Jñāna refers to the ordinary knowledge based on the perception of the sense organs and the reasoning of the mind. The condition of not being able to distinguish clearly between these three kinds of knowledge, with the result that the mind hovers between them, is sought to be conveyed in the word vikalpaiḥ. It's vikalpa with an IH on the end. Vikalpaiḥ. I think it's vikalpaiḥ. This is inevitable as long as the three kinds of knowledge have not separated out, as it were, in three separate layers, but are present in a state of mixture or confusion, which is indicated by the word saṅkīrṇā. It will perhaps help the student to understand this progressive resolution of the three kinds of knowledge if we illustrate the process diagrammatically as follows, or wherever I end up putting it, okay? Isn't this an interesting diagram? Let's take a look at it for a little while. Okay, all right. So we're separating them out. Let's see. It will be seen that while in the first step, knowledge based on Śabda only covers the other two, progressive resolution results in the last step in the complete separation of the three. Students of science will also find the analogy of an emulsion helpful in understanding this progressive resolution and separation into two separate and distinct constituents. If two immiscible liquids are shaken together vigorously, it is possible to prepare an emulsion in which both appear to be present in a homogeneous condition, though they really remain separate. But if the emulsion is allowed to stand for some time, the two liquids will gradually separate out into two separate layers. This analogy is especially apt because it is the absence of agitation which leads to the separation of the two layers, just as in Savitarka Samadhi. It is really the extreme tranquilization of the mind which brings about the separation of the different kinds of knowledge. When the different mental components have separated and are seen in their correct relationship, then there can be no confusion or going from one to the other. It is because they are mistaken for one another and the proper province of each is not defined, that there is confusion and consequent vitarka. See also in this connection, Section 3, Sutra 17. When the mental picture clears up and each component is seen in true perspective, vitarka must come to an end. Section 3, Sutra 17. The sound, the meaning behind it, and the idea, which is present in the mind at the time, are present together in a confused state. By performing samyama on the sound, they are resolved, and there arises comprehension of the meaning of sounds uttered by any living being. Okay, so that was a lot. So now we are at Sutra 43. I'm going to end for today, and I will do 43 in the next video, but let me read it quickly, as I am in the habit of doing. On the clarification of memory, when the mind loses its essential nature, subjectivity, as it were, and the real knowledge of the object alone shines through the mind, nivritarka samadhi is attained. And we'll talk about that next time. I hope you're enjoying this. Isn't it fascinating? Thank you for joining me today. Until next time.